Hello, yes, so we've got Christian calling in. Now, he called in last Sunday. I'm going to play the clip in a moment. Matt got quite angry with him. He's actually calling in about hell and how hell is actually a good idea if you take the emotion out of it. Matt countered that and said, well, you could take the emotion out of anything and say that it's a good thing. And then Matt then said, it's like you could take the evidence. You could say, let's disregard the evidence. All of a sudden, God is a viable proposition. I don't think it's quite the same, because you could have negative emotions about something and yet make a rational argument for it. So I'm not really sure if Matt was quite correct there in saying, in following that line of argument, in dismissing what Christian said about if you could take the emotion. I mean, it's a bit like, for example, capital punishment. We feel strongly that a murderer should be put to death, for example, but we've got the law that says he's got to serve life imprisonment. So the emotion says he should be put to death, but reason says that no, that shouldn't happen, and that he should serve life imprisonment instead. So I'm not really quite sure whether Matt was right to say that. But moving on, let's have a listen, because we're talking about the whole crux of the matter. What happens if you don't accept Jesus, but you've lived otherwise a good life? Where do you go?
It's definitely not something good, but basically it's an eternal kind of regret, mental anguish, possibly.
But you said that was a good thing. You started off by saying that it was a good thing, and now you said nothing good. So which is it?
Yeah, this is referring to hell.
Well, going to hell isn't good, but I think the idea of hell being a punishment for evil is good. It's just, okay. Rather, we'll say that.
So if you and I live a life where we do roughly the same amount of good things and evil things, where we harm just the same number of people and we help the same number of people, and then you believe this credulous claim that Jesus is divine and I don't, you go on to heaven and I go to hell, and you think that this system is good. What's good about it?
Oh yeah, that's easy. Yeah. The reason why hell makes sense is because it's kind of like a 2 or 3-fold thing. If I remember the third one, then it's threefold. But one is that God is just, right? Like in the Christian worldview, you can argue against it, some other time, but in the Christian worldview, God is perfectly holy. He's infinitely holy, in fact, and by doing so, by virtue, he has to punish evil, right? So, that's one reason why hell makes sense.
I can understand what he says when he says perfectly holy, perfectly whole, complete, in other words. Infinitely whole, infinitely holy? Oh, forget it.
Sense is because God has to punish evil once and for all, and no sin should go unpunished. Secondly, the reason why hell makes sense is because, and the reason why it's not, I'll say morally dubious, is because it's very simple to avoid it. Essentially, the idea of hell is it's something which we all deserve because we're all sinners.
Yeah, I'm stuck on.
I need you to pause.
The second reason.
I need you to pause, because I asked you. I gave you a scenario, and I said, you think this system is good, where if you and I live, let's just say, roughly equivalent lives, and you believe and I don't, that me going to hell is a good thing, and you say it's a good thing because God is perfectly just and no sin should go unpunished. But
yeah, well, actually, that makes perfect sense. That's Christian theology, isn't it? That's going back to original sin. So we've all got this stain on our souls in Christian theology, original sin, and the only way that can be cleansed is by accepting the sacrifice that Jesus made. And if you don't accept that sacrifice, you will have, even if you lived a perfect life with no other sins, you will still have that sin staining your soul, and you will be fit for passage to hell. That's how it goes. I'm surprised that Matt is getting has got any confusion about this.
Your sins went unpunished, and there's nothing just about.
No. Absolutely not.
What do you mean, absolutely not?
Well, he believes in forgiveness by proxy, so Jesus was punished for his sins.
Now, I want you to notice something. when Christians call in and start telling atheists what they believe, atheists say, if you want to know what we believe, ask us, don't tell us what we believe. And then here's Jimmy now telling a Christian what he believes. Well, come on.
He's not going to be punished for them, but you will be punished for yours for not believing.
I understand that. I believe the same thing. But what I'm, oh my God, never fucking mind. Never fucking mind if I'm not going to finish a fucking sentence without you fucking interrupting me with your terrible fucking idea about what justice is, then why should I fucking talk to you?
Oh, I apologize, Matt. Don't, I wanted to speak on behalf of my worldview instead of the other.
Yeah, Christian is just explaining Christian theology, and Matt has studied it for a long time. I'm surprised that really this is happening, that Matt could just say, okay, yes, I accept that is Christian theology, but why should we believe that Christianity is true? And they can move on to that. So I don't really see what the issue is here.
Gentlemen, but
I'm asking you questions.
Go ahead.
I'm asking. Oh, you're going to let me finish? You're going to let me finish? Are you going to let me finish? Tell me you're going to let me finish one more motherfucking time. Okay. Now, first of all, your idea is that God is perfectly just, and that is why hell makes sense. But why is it perfectly just for two people who've had the same impact on society and the same values, for one of them to be sent to heaven and one of them to be sent to hell, where the only disparaging criteria, the only difference in the criteria, is whether or not someone is convinced of the divinity of Jesus? What about not being convinced of the divinity of Jesus is so evil that it requires one to be tortured forever? What is just about that?
Yeah, so the idea of not accepting or not trusting in the divinity of Christ, I guess you would say it's sinful, right? But it's essentially the idea that you're choosing to personally take in the penalty of sin, whereas I'm trusting in Jesus to give me his imputed righteousness on me. So
no.
It's not.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely correct. In Christian theology, Jesus paid the price. He sacrificed himself in order to cleanse the original sin, and he will also cleanse all the sins that you've committed on earth. So if you've got somebody who's lived a perfect life, more or less, and hasn't committed any sins, they're still stuck with the stain of original sin. And unless they acknowledge that Jesus paid that price, they can't possibly benefit from it. And so they will indeed go to hell. That's how it works.
Not that I'm less deserving of hell, because we all deserve it, right? But
no, we don't. None of us fucking deserve it. That's part of the problem. But okay, Paul, here, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to mute you, and then I'm going to say what I'm going to say, and then I'll unmute you. You're saying, I asked specifically, why not believing was evil enough to deserve eternal torment? And your answer was, I'm choosing to take on the penalty of sin. No, I'm not convinced that sin is a real concept. I'm not.
I know. We know that, Matt. We know that you don't believe in Christianity. And Christian is just explaining his worldview. So look, I'm not going to go on with this call. We're going to move to the next one, which happened, I think, last night or the night before, where Christian is calling in again. This time he's calling in to justify the authenticity and or truth of the Gospels. So we're going to go to that one and listen near the end of the call, where he's summing up all his evidence, because this is really where they get down to whether Christianity is true or not, and if it all rests on whether the Gospels are true. How do we know the Gospels are true? Okay, so let's go and have a look at that. Okay, yes, so Christian did call in. He called in, I think, on the 12th, with Jake was on with Matt, and he called in about the authenticity, effectively, and the truth of the Gospels. He claimed that there's archaeology and there are other supporting evidence for the claims, or at least for the events and the claims which happen in the Gospels and the Acts of the Apostles. One of which, of course, he mentioned archaeology. Matt wanted to know, well, what in archaeology, for example, supports the resurrection or, the miracles, anything like that. And he said, well, archaeology supports, we know that Bethlehem existed because we've dug it up, etc. And, I mean, this whole thing comes back to New York is a real place, but that doesn't tell us that Spider-Man is real. So I'm really surprised to hear him cite archaeology and just really place names. It doesn't prove anything. So let's just move on then. It's towards the end of the call, and let's see whether Matt can finally press from him what is his top evidence for the truth of the Gospels.
You're just admitting that you don't have good evidence, but you're going to believe it anyway.
All right. I'll get back to hopefully getting to the rest of my list soon. But to answer your question, God himself is not, no, he's not limited to the constraints of our physical universe or time. But things like papyri, which degrade, yeah, you can't really do much about that. Could God maybe?
But God can, right? God can, though.
To say that the absence of that is evidence of absence, I think is kind of a bit silly, though. Would you agree with that?
No, sir.
Wondering why you find such poor evidence compelling, actually.
I haven't even given. I'm given. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, obviously, absence. I know this thing. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And in this case, what Christian is saying is that as for the core claims in the New Testament, he's sort of admitting that there isn't evidence, but that doesn't mean to say that it didn't happen. Yeah? So, but Matt is not saying it didn't happen. He's saying he hasn't got a good reason to believe that it did happen, and that neither should Christian accept that it did happen, because neither does he, as he's admitted. He hasn't got good reason to believe that it did happen.
I'm glad you have a lot of questions, but I have like 11 points, and I've not even gotten really past the first one.
You should have started with a good one.
And I'm not going to stay here forever.
All right, let's get.
Well, I'm trying to build up. I'm trying to give.
By the way, on Sunday,
order,
By the way, on Sunday, after this all failed, didn't you go and call into the Atheist Experience and whine about how I treated you?
Yeah, we did get off on the wrong foot. Like
we sure did.
It was unpreferable to me.
But thanks for calling back. But here's the thing:
when
you say you're admitting that there's an absence of evidence, and you're saying that you think it's silly to consider that evidence for absence.
I didn't admit that.
No. He did say that. He did say it.
Didn't admit that there's an absence of evidence. So when you say that it was a long time ago and papyruses degrade, and then you admit that your first point doesn't actually demonstrate anything of archaeological evidence for support of Jesus, that's not an admission that there's an absence of evidence to support your position?
Yeah, so what I actually said was, first of all, on the archaeological support, my question, which is why I'm here to begin with, is about the four Gospels and Acts. It's not just specifically about Jesus. And you narrowed it down, which I don't mind. But I was talking about...
That's unbelievable. I mean, why call in to talk about inconsequential details in the Gospels? You should be calling in to talk about the things that really matter. The one thing that Paul, who really started off what Christianity that we've now got today, more or less, said that if Christ is not risen, then our faith is in vain. I think words to that effect. Why is he not talking about that? Why is he not focusing on that? Why is he focusing on these other details that nobody really cares about?
How the four Gospels and Acts aren't anachronistic, which is why archaeological support is on my list. Second part, when I talk about absence of evidence.
No, stop. You keep going back to something that I don't disagree with. Are you going to talk about the thing that matters, or are you going to try to construct a case where, because the Gospels mention places that were real, all of a sudden you're going to assert that they're also reliable on a resurrection? Because that's not how reasoning works. I can make a list of 10 things, and 9 of them can be true, and that doesn't tell you at all whether the 10th one is. So is it possible that the Gospels talk about some real events and some events that aren't real?
We'll have to see. I'll move on, though. I'll move on to the rest of my list.
We'll have to see. He couldn't answer yes to that question, and he knew it.
See, no. What do you mean we have to see? Is that a possibility?
Sure, Matt. Sure.
Oh, he has actually admitted it.
Possibility. Sure.
Okay, Christian.
Is it more likely though? I don't believe so.
Christian. Okay, I'm gonna drop this call now before it gets ugly, because you just did this absolutely smug. Sure, Matt. The fact of the matter is, and you can laugh all you want, chucklehead. Learn something.
I was clearing my throat.
Pointing out. Yeah. All right. I'll just mute you until I'm done. Then I'm asking you to present your evidence, and you've got 11 points. But the first one is void of anything substantive. I'm going to let you go to the next one after I unmute you, just to present your next bit of evidence. But at every point where I bring up, hey, do you have anything that specifically confirms the things that matter? The things that matter in the Gospels are Jesus, the miracles that he supposedly did, the things that he supposedly said, whether or not he was crucified, whether or not he rose again. Those are the things that matter, not whether or not Bethlehem or Nazareth were real and existed. But by the way, the census, not something that we have supporting evidence for. There's no supporting evidence for the dead rising up and marching on Jerusalem when the temple veil supposedly ripped. There's no supporting evidence for any of these things. And every time I rate, well, that was a long time ago, or the papyruses degrade, or you haven't let me get to my other points, or sure, Matt, I suppose it's possible that the Gospels might have something true and something not true. That's not a controversial statement. It's not something that where I'm being unreasonable when I ask you, is it possible that the books you're advocating for could include true statements and not true statements? For you to smugly go, sure, Matt, I guess I'll concede that point, means that you're not being an honest interlocutor. Are you actually going to make a case and answer the questions honestly, or did you just call in to preach? Because I don't need the second one.
Yes, I will. And sorry if that offended you. I was being a bit smug.
It's not offended. You can't offend me. What you can do is waste my time and my audience's time. I want you to present the best piece of evidence you have for the position that you hold, that the Gospels reflect Jesus as divine being true.
Okay, here we go with Christian's list of evidence for the truth of the Gospels.
Oh, I did mention archaeological support, and we kind of got hung up on that.
No, archaeological support was justly dismissed.
Manuscript volume, consistency of volume.
Irrelevant.
The recency of the volumes compared to the autographs, which they were purported to be written.
Recency of the volumes. Well, the Gospels, I believe, were supposed to have been written somewhere around, I don't know, between sort of 60 and 90 AD, most of them. So that would be at least, between 30 years and 60 years after the supposed death of Jesus. He's pointing back to some earlier document, which I don't really think that he's got any evidence for.
Fairly. Eyewitness testimony, multiple lines of evidence, so at least like 4. Extra biblical corroboration, extra biblical commentaries, which
extra biblical corroboration. What would that be? Oh, Tacitus and Josephus.
Kind of pertains to the.
Okay, I'm sorry, Christian. I'm sorry, Christian, but I asked you to present. Thank you for the permission to go the fuck ahead. I politely interrupted and even said I was sorry, because what I asked you to do was to present your best piece of evidence. But what you said was manuscript volume, consistency of volumes, recency of volumes. Okay, since you're incapable of doing this, let's start with manuscript volume. What does that 2-word thing mean that you think it's evidence?
The reason why that's on my list is because compared to other, manuscripts from antiquity, right? Famous ones, which may have like 20 or 40, manuscripts or fragments of manuscript. The Bible thankfully has a lot, and that's good evidence that we have a good idea of what it's saying, and it's been reliably transmitted.
Yeah, well, obviously the reason there are a lot of manuscripts is because they were trying to transmit the religion around the ancient world. And obviously in the case of historians, there wouldn't necessarily be so many manuscripts around because they didn't have that objective. It might have been enough just to have copies in the most important libraries. And in addition to that, Tacitus and other Roman historians, for example, are not making claims that anybody rose from the dead or performed miracles. Nobody's claiming, for example, that Caesar was killed by Brutus and then rose from the dead, or that miracles were performed.
So
Christian, as we started, I said at the starting, that the evidence that the copies or the translations and copies that we have right now are accurate to what the original said is not something that I've been disputing. I asked for evidence that they were true. Does the number of manuscript pieces in any way for any book ever in the history of the universe have any impact on whether or not what the manuscripts say are more likely to be true?
No, sir. I just answered your question. That's it.
Thank you. I'm now done.
Okay. Well, I hope we can have a better talk sometime.
I hope you come up with better evidence next time, because what you keep presenting is absolutely nothing. The truth.
Well, I'll be able to finish my list sometime.
Obviously that was a good admission from him in the end. About the fact that there is no book in history. The claims in the books that we've got in the whole of history have no impact on whether something actually really happened. Yeah, okay, that's fine. He admitted that is the case, but earlier in the call, he said that he thinks that the probability is on the side of the resurrection and the miracles actually being true. So, well, I suppose that's an argument for another day, but he hasn't really presented, he hasn't presented any compelling evidence whatsoever. So, well, that's about it. So I guess we'll be hearing more from Christian. He'll be around for a few more weeks, I think, and then, like other regular callers, like Otangelo and Emmanuel, I guess that he will eventually vanish, but we'll try and get some mileage out of him for now and see where he goes. Bye for now.